Boris Pasternak was born not merely into a family of culture, but into a living world of art. His father, Leonid Pasternak, was a painter who captured the soft glows and tragic shadows of human life. His mother, Rosa Kaufmann, was a concert pianist who filled their Moscow home with music. Out of this harmony of colors and sound, Boris would grow into one of Russia's most profound poetic voices, a man who spoke to the world not through ideology or politics, but through the trembling honesty of the human soul. From the very beginning, he seemed to belong to that rare class of thinkers and poets who, while surrounded by noise and tyranny, choose silence and conscience as their resistance. Pasternak's early life was shaped by the turbulence of the early 20th century, an age of revolutions, wars, and disillusionments. He began his intellectual journey studying philosophy at the University of Marburg in Germany, where he fell under the influence of neo-Kantian thinkers like Hermann Cohen. Philosophy taught him discipline and metaphysical precision, but his heart was elsewhere. He realized that poetry, not philosophy, would be his language for understanding existence. He once said, "Poetry is a spiritual barometer, it records the unseen pressures of the soul." He returned to Russia and began writing poems that shimmered with inner intensity, poems not about ideology or politics, but about the simple miracle of being alive. His early works, such as My Sister, Life and Themes and Variations, were lyrical reflections of love, time, and nature. They were filled with images of light breaking through clouds, of fleeting emotion suspended in eternity. But as the years went on, the landscape of Russia darkened. The Soviet regime tightened its control over every form of artistic expression. Poetry, once the voice of the people, became a dangerous act. Words could now cost lives. In such a time, Pasternak's commitment to inner freedom became a silent rebellion. He refused to become a tool of propaganda. While other poets praised the party, Pasternak wrote of the spirit, of faith, of conscience. In his heart, he knew that poetry had to remain free, or it would cease to be poetry at all. For Pasternak, the great question of his time was not political, but moral. Could one remain true to oneself in a world built on lies? Could one still believe in beauty and truth when surrounded by fear and conformity? His answer was quiet but unyielding. Through his verses, he expressed a spiritual resistance, a belief that the human spirit cannot be fully enslaved. He believed that the poet's duty was to bear witness to the truth, even when that truth condemned him. In every generation, he wrote, there are those who will stand for the light, even if the light burns them. It was this conviction that led him to create his masterpiece, Doctor Zhivago. Written during one of the most oppressive periods in Soviet history, the novel was not merely a love story or a historical chronicle. It was a meditation on freedom, conscience, and the cost of being human. The main character, Yuri Zhivago, is a physician and poet who lives through the storms of revolution and war. Through him, Pasternak portrayed the eternal struggle between the soul and the system. Zhivago's life becomes a symbol of every person who refuses to surrender the inner world to the machinery of ideology. He loves, he suffers, he doubts, but he never stops seeking truth. And in that search, he becomes a free man even when living under tyranny. When Doctor Zhivago was completed, no Soviet publisher dared to print it. The novel was smuggled out of the country and first published in Italy in 1957. The following year, Pasternak received the Nobel Prize in Literature for his important achievement both in contemporary lyrical poetry and in the field of the great Russian epic tradition. What should have been a moment of triumph became an ordeal. The Soviet authorities saw the prize not as an honor, but as an act of betrayal. He was accused of treason, slandered in the press, and expelled from the Writers' Union. Under immense pressure, he was forced to decline the Nobel Prize. Yet, even in that humiliation, he stood with dignity. His response was simple: "I am lost to the world in which I used to live, and I am content." In those dark years, Pasternak became a living symbol of moral courage. He never attacked the Soviet regime directly; he didn't need to. His very refusal to conform was enough. His faith, his poetry, and his silence were all acts of defiance. He believed that truth and beauty were more powerful than any ideology. In every generation, he said, there must be men who will keep alive the fire of conscience. His resistance was not the kind of rebellion that throws stones or shouts slogans. It was the rebellion of a man who continues to speak softly when the whole world demands silence. At the heart of Pasternak's thought lies his understanding of faith. For him, faith was not dogma or ritual, but an experience of life itself. He believed that God was not confined to temples or scriptures but revealed in every moment of creation, in the falling snow, in a child's laughter, in a lover's gaze, in the courage to speak the truth. He once wrote, "The meaning of life is to be alive, to feel that pulse of creation that beats within us and around us." This mystical vision of the world sustained him through persecution. It was his belief that beauty and goodness were not destroyed by tyranny; they only retreated into silence, waiting to return. His poetry reflects this deep, almost religious reverence for life. In his verses, nature becomes a living testimony of divine presence. A thunderstorm, a leaf trembling in wind, a face illuminated by candlelight, all these are not metaphors but revelations. Through poetry, Pasternak sought to redeem the ordinary, to show that holiness still exists even amid suffering. His was a faith born of struggle, a faith that refused to die in darkness. And in that faith, he found his strength. Yet Pasternak's story is not just about resistance and faith, it is also about love. Love, for him, was not merely emotion but revelation. It was the one experience that could pierce through despair and restore meaning to existence. In Doctor Zhivago, love becomes a force that transcends history and politics. It is the soul's rebellion against the mechanization of life. Through love, Pasternak saw the possibility of redemption, not in the political sense, but in the spiritual one. He wrote, "Love is not a weakness. It is the most courageous act of all, for it demands that we give ourselves completely, without guarantee, without power, without fear." In the Soviet Union of his time, to speak of freedom, conscience, or love was itself a dangerous act. Pasternak understood that real tyranny is not just political, it is spiritual. It is the attempt to erase individuality, to make human beings forget who they are. The task of the artist, therefore, was to remind people of their humanity. Art, he said, is not a luxury. It is the conscience of the world. In his poetry, he tried to awaken that conscience, to rekindle the inner freedom that no regime can destroy. He believed that as long as there are poets, there will always be hope. Toward the end of his life, Pasternak withdrew from public life, living quietly in Peredelkino, a small village near Moscow. He spent his days surrounded by birch trees, writing, reflecting, and composing letters to friends who shared his pain. He knew that he would never be free in the political sense, but he had already achieved something far greater, spiritual freedom. He once wrote, "The great victory is not over others, but over oneself, to remain human when humanity itself is forbidden." When he died in 1960, thousands of ordinary Russians attended his funeral, despite government warnings. They recited his poems aloud, defying the authorities. That day, it was clear, Pasternak's voice could not be silenced. His spirit had entered the conscience of the people. Boris Pasternak's legacy endures because he represents something timeless, the triumph of integrity over fear, of poetry over propaganda, of conscience over conformity. In an age when truth was outlawed, he chose to live by truth. In a world that demanded obedience, he remained free. His life reminds us that freedom is not given by governments or taken by tyrants, it is something born within, sustained by faith, and expressed through courage. In his struggle, we find our own reflection. Every generation faces its own form of tyranny, sometimes political, sometimes social, sometimes internal. And every generation must decide whether to live as slaves to fear or as servants of truth. Pasternak's answer was clear. He did not call for violence or revolution. He called for awakening, for each person to rediscover the divine spark within, to live authentically and courageously. He taught that poetry, faith, and love are not luxuries but necessities of the soul. They are the weapons of the spirit against the machinery of oppression. And in this sense, his philosophy remains profoundly relevant. In a time when truth is again manipulated, when conformity replaces conviction, Pasternak's voice echoes like a whisper from eternity: man was born for truth and beauty. Do not let them die within you. His poetry, his novel, his silence, all were acts of rebellion. But it was not rebellion born of hatred, it was rebellion born of love, love for life, for truth, for the sacred dignity of the human soul. That is why, decades later, Boris Pasternak still matters. He reminds us that art is not just about beauty, it is about bearing witness. That faith is not an escape, it is a form of courage. And that freedom is not a gift, it is a responsibility. Through his life and words, he showed that even under tyranny, a human being can remain unbroken, uncorrupted, and alive to the eternal. In the end, Pasternak's message was simple but eternal: the poet's task is not to change the world, but to keep the world human. He believed that truth, even whispered, has power. And though he lived under oppression, his words have outlived his oppressors. His life stands as a testament to the idea that while tyranny dies, truth endures. In his poetry, we find a light that refuses to go out, a reminder that faith, love, and freedom are the soul's eternal rebellion against darkness.